Wow, I had no idea about Ruby. Raise your hand if you had no idea about Ruby. Don't lie to me. Okay, so I guess we're gonna have to all come back at 6:30, check out her life. I'm gonna do a little bit of clap, if you, okay? You're gonna clap with me because it's been post-lunch. I wanna make sure energy is high. So, if you have received a child tax credit or know somebody who's received child tax credit, clap 3 times. Okay, we're here. How about this? If you're from a city or a region that has a cash pilot, either going on right now or is gonna have one soon, clap 3 times. Damn, we're winning. We could actually leave. I mean, with this clapping, our work is done. Now clap if you actually fought for one of those policies. Okay, we need, that was the least amount of claps, but we're not judging. Look, my name is Harish Patel. I direct economic security for Illinois. I call Chicago home. And I'm originally an immigrant from India and lived in the United States since October 4th, 1999. So coming up to my anniversary. And it's important for me to tell you that because I come to this work as an immigrant. And I enter this world of complex stories that we have all heard around poverty from many of other people who shared a little bit around their family entering that world. My mom, we came here after my father passed away, and my mom, did a lot of what many moms do, applied for all the things and had to stand in all the lines, and she didn't speak very good English. I was in those lines with her, translating, and that's sort of what got me to do this work. And I have a feeling that most of the people in this room have one of those entrances, and we're going to hear from many of the folks here who either have that story or know a lot of folks who they're fighting for have that story. So I'm really excited to be here with you all because a few years ago when we started doing this work in Chicago, in 2018 we wrote a report thinking about cash policies when it was considered, like you all know, when you started talking about it, out there idea. We got made fun of. It was not taken seriously by either the industry, the policymakers, or the funding world. And it took us, a couple of years to build out the power that we have now that allows them to be in the room with us without, and taking us very seriously. And I think that is power because of us before this movement. So I'm excited to be part of all this. In Illinois, a couple wins for you to share before I'm gonna hand the mic to my other states and DC, should be a state. Illinois, we won, we have the city of Chicago, which has the biggest pilot in America, which is 5,000 folks who are getting $500 for a year. Many of the advocates that actually fought for that are here, and I'm very grateful to be working with them. We also have the financially the biggest, which is Cook County pilot, which is almost 40,000, but it's for 2 years. It goes to 3,250 families. And then we won, the state just sent everybody checks to fight. They call it inflation checks, rebates, whatever. Our state just gave money to everybody who has a dependent at home. You got $100 per dependent, $50 for you, so up to $400, everybody got a check this month. And then we expanded our earned income tax credit to include ITIN filers, so undocumented folks or documented folks who are filing their tax with a 9-digit number that's not the Social Security number, just another number. Those folks are now included in all ages. And this work all happens in coalition, and you're going to hear that word over and over because none of us can do this alone. So truth is, the pandemic made a lot of this relevant, and there was a silver lining that our work was fast forwarded because the need was so intense and high. And that also made it so that we got to win on multiple levels: cash, tax equity, ways that we hopefully all see how it's all interconnected. Because when I'm talking to folks on the receiving end of cash pilot versus cash program versus SNAP versus housing voucher versus whatever, they are full humans and they don't understand how we talk. So hopefully, one of the things that we'll learn is people want money in their pocket. How we make it happen is on us as organizers, activists, however. People want to be seen as like full self. So hopefully we can come out of this conversation with a little bit of bonding between the tax equity work, the cash work, the SNAP work, the housing voucher work, and we see each other super deeply connected because most human beings are not seeing themselves in silos. With that, I'm going to introduce my amazing crew of anti-manel. This is a panel of no men, which is very rare and should be acknowledged. Whoever put this together, congrats. We have Rep. Thai. She's the vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus in the state of Washington. She's the first refugee elected to serve in the Washington State Legislature. Yeah, that's worthy of, it does matter, representation matters. She's led the work passing the Washington Working Families Tax Credit in 2021, right? And you'll hear a lot more about this because Washington is one of those states that doesn't actually have an income tax. And so they have to work quadruply hard to give people money without a tax code, right? So you'll hear a lot about that. Next, we have Melody Webb, who's a organizer, even though it says lawyer here, organizer and a lawyer and executive director and a founder of the Mothers Outreach Network from DC Guaranteed Income Coalition. I think many folks already talked about the amazing work in previous panels and how she's constantly connecting the dots between all different kind of movements. We're very grateful. Third, we have from New Mexico, Gabriela Ibañez Guzmán, also a lawyer and an organizer with Somos, Pueblo, Unido, and also members of the New Mexico Economic Relief Working Group. And last, we have Sarah Kimberlin, who's with the California Budget and Policy Center, and you'll hear a lot. I mean, I really dislike California because they have so much money. They're constantly coming up with new ways to give it away. And we're going to hear about that because I tried to tell my governor, like, you want to run for president, you better do at least twice as hard whatever Gavin Newsom is putting out in the world, man. So Sarah, keep doing that so I can use you to get more money for my people. So we're going to start with Washington, D.C., actually. You ready? Okay. So you have, I mean, many of you folks already know that Washington, D.C. has like the most generous EITC in the United States. And I would love to know sort of, I mean, everybody probably wants to know how you got there, what kind of organizing, what kind of advocating that took place, both from your organization and all the people that you coalesce with, to get that, the biggest earned income tax credit in the United States, and also if there is movement towards child tax credit in that work that you're doing.
Thank you, and I'm so glad to be here with you all today to put faces to names. I will say that I want to tell you a little bit about our organization and then tell you what we did and why we did that work. So I'm with Mothers Outreach Network, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. Anti-poverty, we do anti-racist work. We lift up Black women in the struggle for family preservation. We seek to transform government income and child welfare policy to keep families together. Our programs are legal in nature. We engage in policy advocacy and organizing, and our organization is actually in the process of fundraising for a guaranteed income pilot, which we expect to launch by the end of the year for women whose children are in the child welfare system. So we're really excited about that. We did this work because it made sense for our organization to do the work. I like data also, so I want to just ground a little bit in data and say that in Washington, D.C., one of the wealthiest cities in the country, in the world, 15% of the population lives below the poverty line. And connected to that, I think, is that 80% of the families in the child welfare system are there because of neglect, which is driven by poverty. So this work is really important to us, and we try to connect it to family separation work. And poverty in this country is a lawful reason to remove children from their parents. So we think this is really important work. So what we did, and I want to say in recognition of our local DC Fiscal Policy Institute, we work in coalition. We worked very hard to educate policymakers. We advocated in several ways. We've demonstrated the benefits of the Earned Income Tax Credit increase. We as an organization put on workshops, empowerment workshops, where we taught parents about their rights around the child tax credit. We also put those on Zoom. Now we're offering them in the libraries. We want them to take advantage of the child tax credit as well. We also offer self-help, parents, legal clinics, tax clinics. We also have advocated for the extension of the expanded federal earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. And so we really educated lawmakers, as I'll talk about a little bit later in our coalition. We formed a coalition, we met with lawmakers, we worked across multiple coalitions to ensure that people whose work touched on all aspects of poverty were together. And I think, the evidence is there in the child tax credit. We pointed out, the importance of the child tax credit and the role that it played in people's lives in cutting poverty by 50%. So we did a lot of educating on the ground, worked across coalitions, and we continue to work, and our hope is that we will expand the Earned Income Tax Credit to include, as Dr. Hamilton said this morning, people who are no income earners. So, and I'm just looking forward to hearing from others, panel.
Thank you, Melody. Washington State, we're going to go to you next. I already mentioned this, that you all don't have a state income tax. I think it's helpful to understand how you create a whole you have to fight a whole set of different fights. You have to create a whole policy out of nothing. We would love to sort of understand the process that from a legislative side, and then also how this idea came about to you. Can you tell us a little bit about this policy win? And I guess give people their flowers if there are any shout outs there.
Absolutely. So, Washingtonian, could you just say, hey? And I wanted to say that as Melanie mentioned, this work is not possible without coalitions building, right? And the people who in the room today was part of the critical works, and I also want to shout out to the people who are not in the room today, and most importantly, the people who really being impacted by the current system, our current system, which I want to change. And I think I'm sitting here looking at the clips that were played earlier. Two thoughts came to my mind, so I thought I'm gonna get it out of the way so I can clear my mind. I'm one of those, if thoughts enter my mind, I'm kind of like, I spend time to process it, so I need to get it out. First of all, I know that you guys are activists, advocates, funders, foundations. Honestly, if you can, please run for office. I really, really want that the next clips that we see is not gonna say politicians are bad people. Politicians don't understand their people. Politicians are there to do meaningful work, which is policies, and policy impact people's lives. So we need to have good politicians who are doing good politics and advance good policies. So we need you to run.
Wait, raise your hand if you're in, because you better come get her number, because politicians need money and she's gonna fund it.
I didn't say that. The second thought came through my mind is exactly to the question, right? The system has been created in a way that if we want to change it, the system continue to ask us, where do you find the money? So yes, coalitions, advocates, and people who are impacted by these policy can come and talk to policymakers and say how this would be positively impacted our lives. And the questions coming back is like, where do you find the money? And as introduced, I'm the first refugee elected to serve in Washington State Legislature. I will tell you, my family was literally go, are you out of your mind? When I decided to run for an elected office. Like, that's not my business. My family came from Vietnam. I came to Washington State when I was 15. I ended up graduated University of Washington with a pharmacy degree. My life is set. I'm good to go. Why do I have to do this? And the reason why I'm asking you guys to run is because I was the one who bought into that entire idea that politicians are horrible people and I don't want to be horrible people. And that's why this work is so difficult, right? If we go out, if I go out and ask myself 10 years ago even, if anybody who asked me the question, where do you find the money? This sounds good, but where do you find the money? I don't have the answer. I don't know how the budget system works. And so I think part of the whole conversation is that we are not only trying to educate lawmaker, we need to educate advocate, and we need to advocate the public who come to these conversations. And I will share with you, Washington State is a trifecta state. We have majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and the governor who is a Democrat. It took us 13 years from the time the policy was introduced until 2021 when the policy passed. And I will tell you, when the coalition came and asked me to sponsor the piece of legislation, I did say that if this piece of legislation does not include I-10 filer, you are welcome to go ask someone else. You will have my vote, but I'm not interested in policies that is not inclusive. And since elected and served I got elected in 2018 and started my first session in 2019. I started to socialize the idea of compassionate legislation. And that is, and I'm trying to push, as far as policy is concerned as well, that we are not using money. How many of you working with lawmakers and the piece that prioritize which legislation proposal will pass is a fiscal note, whether the state have money or not. If the state don't have money, even though it's a good idea, it's a good policy, it's gonna be pushed back. And so I wanted to change that. I want policies and proposals anchor on people's lives. I want to bring us to really, the reason I have this job is not because how much money we collect from taxation. It's because how my work will impact my neighbor's life and most importantly, my family lives. And so I'm asking all of us to start thinking about it and considering that and how we anchor our policies. And really coming back to answer your questions, I think all of those are the reason why we were able to pass this legislation in 2021. Because it's not just the mind being touched, how we use math, as someone spoke earlier in the morning, but we touch the heart. And when we actually being able to move legislations that there is both the heart and the mind, usually those legislations are good.
Thank you. And we're going to go to California next, which has a very different fiscal health situation Illinois is ranked 50th, not something I'm proud of, but Illinois is ranked 50th in fiscal health. I don't know if Daniel Biss is still here. He was in the Senate, and he tried, and then he gave up, and he went to be a mayor of Evanston. And I'm saying that because if Washington State, that has no income tax, has figured out this, Illinois, that is ranked 50th in the nation for fiscal health, and we pretty much have not had money because of our pension debacle for the past 20 years, ever. So every time we go, we have the same answer from legislatures. They care about what we're saying, they don't have the money. So I'm gonna go to you, Sarah, because you have some resources, and you have been thinking outside the box on a lot of these issues, kind of leading. California leads on so many of the inclusions that many of the time we model in other states. Can you talk us a little bit through about like the young child tax credit, how that came about? The other sort of, you have a guaranteed income bill. You have other ways of inclusion that came before Illinois, that became even before Washington State.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. It's so great to be here as a sort of later addition to this conversation. I just wanted to start by saying there is really a lot of really important thinking and organizing and implementing work related to guaranteed income happening in California right now, and across so many different aspects of policy and practice that relate to guaranteed income. So there's work on baby bonds that's been really exciting this year. There's been a lot of work on access and inclusion in existing cash and safety net programs. And then there's been work also on, of course, the local GI pilots. There's a lot of those going on right now, right? And then tax credits, which is what I was actually asked specifically to focus on. So also, I just really want to emphasize that it's great to see there's actually quite a few people here from California. So I don't know if everyone could raise their hands if you're doing work in California of some kind. So I just want to really emphasize that. So I'm here as one person representing one organization that has a very specific role that we play in some of this work. But there's so much work going on and so many individuals and organizations that are doing really important work leading on different parts of guaranteed income across California. So if you want the full story, you definitely need to talk to the other people who are here, who are doing that work, and also reach out to the people who are not here. So a lot of us are not here since we're way far away from here. So just to make sure you keep that in mind, that I'll talk about a piece of this, but there's a lot more that's happening that's really exciting. So I wanted to specifically talk about tax rebates and tax credits, because that's an area that the California Budget and Policy Center follows really closely. And Harish, you mentioned that there was a tax rebate recently in Illinois. So California was in the news this year for having just a really large batch of one-time state revenues, which was exciting. And it makes me want to go off on a tangent into the power of progressive taxation of high incomes and capital gains. But that's a really important part of this question, but I think that's a conversation for another time. But if anyone wants to talk about that, I love talking about that as well. But we had this large amount of revenues, and for this one time, a big use of those one-time dollars was that policymakers chose to direct a lot of that money, $9.8 billion of that money, in cash to Californians in the form of tax rebates. And larger payments were given to Californians with lower incomes. I mean, I think it wasn't a perfect policy. There's ways that could have been improved more to make sure it was really emphasizing even more strongly the needs of the people who are hit the hardest by the cost of living in California and by inflation. But I think it was really promising to see policymakers, their minds going to, a good use for this money is to give the money directly to the people so that they can meet the needs and prioritize their needs the way they know that they need to be prioritized. So that was great. I think what I really want to focus on right now, though, is the ongoing policies, because that was a one-time policy, but I think the ongoing policies are how we sort of begin to, I think as Mayor Tubbs, I think it was, said, I'm not sure, bend the tax code in a direction that it needs to be bent. So there were three really important tax credit policies that were adopted this year in California that I think are really important to the guaranteed income conversation. And I want to say the work on tax credits, the California Budget and Policy Center follows this issue really closely. And the particular role we play is that we really focus on data and analysis that supports and informs the conversation about refundable tax credits in California. But this work is really led by the Cali ITC Coalition, is a broad-based group, includes a lot of other organizations playing other important roles, especially around organizing and direct advocacy. So just to emphasize that that's sort of the power behind these policies and these changes that have been put into place. So three key things that happened this year related to state tax credits in California. So the first is a policy related to our young child tax credit. And Natalie mentioned this earlier, that it's our young child tax credit. It's similar in some ways to the federal child tax credit. It's $1,000 that goes out to Californians below a certain income level when they file their taxes for households that have a child age 6 and under. And so the important thing that changed, that was adopted this year, was that California ended the exclusion of families that do not have income from paid employment. And this as an ongoing policy. So we saw this at the federal level with the federal child tax credit just for 1 year, when we saw the power of that and the importance of that. And so I think one thing that's really significant about this happening in California is that the state made an ongoing commitment to do that. So just to demonstrate that this is a policy, the kind of policy change that there's an ongoing need for it and it can be done on an ongoing basis. So that was a really exciting policy change. A second change was that refundable tax credits, like California's refundable tax credits, we have a state income tax credit, the Cali ITC, as well as the young child tax credit. So they're no longer going to be diverted to pay debts that the tax filers owe to the state. And I think also an important policy, just to make sure that more of that families and individuals get to keep the full amount of the credit that they're counting on to be able to pay for their basic needs, to say that that should take priority over the state claiming dollars to repay debts. So that was an important change that we implemented over time. And then finally, there's a new state tax credit that was put into place. And this is a credit of $1,000 specifically for current and former foster youth ages 18 to 25. And so that will be a new credit that will be provided to those individuals when they file their taxes. So again, modeled on the idea of a child tax credit, but expanding out to reach other Californians who, in order to provide that kind of unrestricted cash support to other Californians in a way that is effective to help people meet their needs. So those are three changes that are adopted on an ongoing basis that, again, I think do strongly reflect the values of guaranteed income. And there's still definitely more work to be done, and many other individuals and organizations that are involved in thinking about this and working on this in California and coming up with new ideas and new ways of approaching it. But I think these are three important policies in terms of next steps, or some next steps of making the tax code, moving it in the direction that it needs to, which is to be an effective tool for advancing economic justice.
Yeah, thank you, California. And I guess to keep following, I think Illinois is probably gonna, next year our coalition is thinking about introducing Illinois child tax credit. Hopefully ours will be a little bit bigger, so next year I can talk about that. I want to go to, look, the tax code is, as we know, racist, sexist. It was built by a bunch of, so the tax code actually doesn't work for everybody. And we want to hear from, the experience of New Mexico around the fact, okay, New Mexico people, raise your hand. All right, there you are. I think there's been an amazing sort of bold work happening in New Mexico for folks who are being left out of the tax code. And it would be amazing, please share a little bit about how the policy that you all actually able to win in New Mexico and how you got there. We're going to come to, as a follow-up around this, is to talk a little bit about coalition. So if you want to get into both, take a little bit of time and just get into both and kind of tell us the full story.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Gabriela Ibañez Guzmán. I am a staff attorney, even though I don't tend to mention that because Sometimes attorneys are our own worst enemies. So I say I'm an organizer with a community-based, power-based, immigrant-run, focused organization. I am actually a Chicagoland native. I was the crazy person who cheered Mayor Biss because I went to public school in Evanston. And actually, the executive director at Somos is a native of Stockton. So we've been talking about that young mayor in Stockton for years and watching all of his triumphs. And so, as I mentioned, Somos is an immigrant worker-based organization. We are more than 20 years old. We don't get as many kudos as some of the bigger states like California or Washington, but my organization is behind some pretty impressive legislation. We passed our inclusive driver's license law in 2003. And so that meant if you were a New Mexico resident and could prove it, regardless if you had a driver's license or not, you were, whether you had a social security number or not, you were entitled and able to apply for a driver's license. And that idea came from a group of moms of color, Mexican moms, Mexican American moms coming together to figure out how they could mutually support one another. And the Mexican mom said, I don't want to feel like I'm breaking the law every time I take my kids to school. I don't want to feel like I'm breaking the law, when I'm taking my kids to their medical appointments. And so we said, let's figure it out. And so in 2003, we passed that law. In 2005, we passed our DREAM Act, which included financial aid, because a lot of our families, we can't go to college unless we have access to financial aid. We passed anti-base policing in 2009. We improved the state minimum wage law in 2009 as well. We passed our City of Santa Fe Living Wage Act in 2004, which set the minimum wage at $8.50, and now our minimum wage is close to $13, and we always like to say we did that before San Francisco. So, and we passed our DO law before California too. But Washington was on our tail, but we tend to lead the way sometimes. And this was another example of how we led the way. So March 16th of 2020, our state shut down. Our governor believed in science, and so she said we need to take a break, step back, and figure out what's going on. And we, Somos, and other community-based, immigrant-based organizations said we needed to get together to figure out what this was going to mean for our community, because we had a sinking suspicion that our community, immigrant families, mixed status families, and I come from a mixed status family to this day. I'm the first U.S. born person in my family, and we were right. We were right, unfortunately. Immigrant families, mixed status families, so usually mom or dad are undocked, and the kids tend to be U.S. citizens, and they file their taxes with an ITIN number, were completely excluded. And so the week after March 16th of 2020, we started meeting every Wednesday, and we meet every Wednesday to this day. And we decided to work together in coalition, not because the foundation told us to work together, not because any person with power or money said, y'all need to get together and submit reports and do all these things. We got together because we had a mutual goal, we had mutual respect for each other, and we had the common goal of addressing whatever exclusions were going to come our way, and unfortunately we were correct. So just to remind folks, so back in March of 2020, the CARES Act passed, and part of that was to provide $1,200 for every income tax filer, $500 for every child. So if you were a child in this country who was, quote unquote, unlucky to have a parent who was an ITIN filer, you didn't get any of that. No money for you. And so what we did is that we created the New Mexico Economic Relief Working Group. We started to figure out how we were going to address this and flip the narrative, flip the switch. And we had one policy think tanky group that we were working with, but with the understanding that the community-based organizations were going to lead this effort. that we knew the best policy from our community because we were talking with our community every single day. They were calling us, telling us what they were struggling with, what they needed, and it wasn't from focus groups or things like that. We are the community. And the think tank groups, New Mexico Voices for Children, you need to give credit where credit is really due, when you have true allies who really listen to immigrant community, listen to people of color, listen to those of us who actually have connections with the community, and make it not about themselves or wanting to build their policy chops, but to have good policy that impacts people of color, the working poor, so to speak. And so we released a report in May of 2020, which we didn't know it, that we were trying to, change the narrative. And so since then, our battle cry has been, it's our money. Es nuestro dinero. We are working still. We don't have paid sick leave. It's May of 2020. There's no paid sick leave mandated in New Mexico. We contribute to this state. We are keeping New Mexico moving forward. And so we use that report probably to this day whenever we do our lobbying work. And so we had our first major breakthrough when the city of Santa Fe, which has a long history, as I mentioned, a lot of the work I mentioned that Somos was able to do we did it in Santa Fe first. And so Santa Fe has a long history of being a sanctuary city. We are unabashedly a sanctuary city. We believe in taking in people and treating them fairly, humanely. And Mayor Weber, the mayor of Santa Fe, who is a mayor for GBI, listened to us and said, okay, here, what about 1.2, or I forget what the exact number was, $1.1 million in direct cash assistance specifically for people who were excluded from federal stimulus checks. And so that started in earnest in November, and at the same time, on the heels of the mayor of Santa Fe doing that, and we knew Santa Fe had to do it first, because that's how it always is in New Mexico. Santa Fe gets the ball rolling, and then quick after that, the state of New Mexico, which was really part of our goal, the state of New Mexico agreed to use $7 million. It was a mix of CARES Act and general fund money. General fund money is always that tricky money, right, Representative? Because it's taken right out of the bank account of the state. And it takes a lot of power to be able to get that money. And they used the SNAP apparatus to distribute this money. So folks could go to the New Mexico Human Services Department, apply for this money, and the state of New Mexico, the Human Services Department, would use the SNAP apparatus to send out that money. Because, while we were a mighty crew of the working, the economic relief working crew, we were a collection of C3s, and we have C4s now, because all cool C3s have C4s doing election work, right? We were not going to create an apparatus from scratch. I know Oregon, they created this incredible apparatus from scratch. Incredible work. We give you kudos. We could not do that. We were running all over the place. We were working on cash. We were working on legislation to get paid sick leave, which thankfully passed. We really had to push to get our paid sick leave passed. And it was very moving as well, because our members who were also fighting for the cash were fighting for sick leave, because we were the ones getting sick. We were the ones having our family members pass away from COVID during that first 18 months where there was nothing, really, no protection. And so that's how you marry the work. That's how you marry power building for people of color. That's how you marry listening to the community, listening to workers, listening to low-wage workers in terms of what they needed. And so the first 1.1 million from the city of Santa Fe, state of New Mexico, $7 million in November, December. City of Albuquerque followed suit. They also had millions of dollars from the CARES Act money. And it was really important for us to do the statewide, money because we knew that there were jurisdictions. So we are between Arizona and Texas. We are sandwiched between those two states. And we knew that in those areas close to those other states, they would never, ever consider giving cash to undocumented immigrants, poor people, people of color, fill in the blank, because the power structure in those areas are not representative of those communities. And so that was the only way we would be able to get money as a lifeline to those communities, because federal stimulus excluded us, but also what was tremendously disheartening was the exclusion from unemployment, from the PUA, from the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, because that was $600 a week that did not come to our families. And it was a lifeline. And I am happy to hear for so many folks here that that was a lifeline for y'all. But we didn't get any of that. And so before the city of Santa Fe began its program, we were able to get some money, and we called all of our members in the city of Santa Fe just to let them know this was happening, and it wasn't a scam, because people trust us. And if we said, we're calling from Somos, the city of Santa Fe is distributing this cash, it's not a scam. We are working with them. Please apply. We also asked them, how are you doing this? How are you surviving? And the amount of debt, credit card debt, was overwhelming. The amount of borrowing money from friends and family was also overwhelming. And thankfully, at least, some of our members were able to get food through expanded SNAP, and their U.S. citizen children qualified. They didn't get any SNAP allotment because federal government prevents SNAP going to people who don't have Social Security numbers and don't qualify. And so, just to wrap up, we also were able to pass a law getting rid of the exclusions of our working family tax credit, because we also know that the earned income tax credit at the federal level also excludes I-10 filers. So if you have one I-10 filer on your tax return, that family receives absolutely nothing from the earned income tax credit. And so the takeaways, I would say from my conversation, is work with community-based organizations, have them be the leader. We are also doing a GBI pilot with mixed status families across the state, 330 families across the state, and they're all mixed status. And we were able to change some policies. I'm going to get into this more later, but we were able to change some policies in terms of our SNAP benefits and not having that not count as income. And we want to be able to use that for our GBI participants. But we only have enough money for our first year, and we are trying to fundraise money for our second year. And a lot of the foundations that we work with, they're wonderful people, but they don't want to release the money for the cash payments. And so we're able to get money for the research portion of our GBI pilots, but it's getting harder and harder to get the money for the cash part of the payments. And so we really encourage our foundation friends and partners to, have that difficult conversation and realize that we really do need y'all to let go of some of that money so we can continue doing this incredible work. And I'll wrap it up with that.
Thank you. So I think what we're saying is that we don't want to make the mistakes other people made before us by excluding people in how we are imagining guaranteed income or our tax equity work is ultimately the summary. So if you're in a room where everybody's not included, then either you got to speak up or leave that room and build another one where everybody is. Sadly, we may not have that much more time to get into a coalition work. I do want to invite Rep to sort of close us out on there's coalition work we do outside. There's coalition work that I think a lot of us don't always have an insight around that you all do on the inside, and how the two can function better or have some good models of how it's functioning.
Oh boy, I wouldn't go as far as good model, but I am happy to share our experience. Again, I think I realize that this work is people work, and I think I have conversation with my people kind of last night, is that people have a tendency to have flaws. And I think until we recognize that we have so many flaws, we cannot really correct them. And so at least in Washington State, and I can say, because it passed in 2021, and as you know, 2021, just like some of our state and Washington, D.C., I hope, follow the science. We closed everything. However, we kept our legislative sessions going through a virtual session. And that create a really difficult connections, communications, kind of build that relationship. And, you know, in Hamilton, the musical, it say, you know, if it's difficult work, leave it to the immigrant. And so if it's really, really difficult, leave it to the refugee. Because they came to this country with nothing, and somehow they build themselves up. And the other part of it is I was sort of like get trained as a pharmacist, because as pharmacists you have to deal with physicians. And when physicians make mistake, the pharmacist is the one who have to call physician and tell them, hey, you make mistake, you can kill your patient. And you get yelled at by physicians all the time. So I'm trained. I did share with the coalitions that they needed to, I mean, our work is back and forth, in and out, that if they go out and talk to legislators and whoever they're having hard time talking to, mark them, because I will go and talk to them. I don't care if Democrat, I don't care if that Republican, no, I really don't care if they see themselves as God. I talk to God, because this work is so important. And so that's the inside part. I did not limit only on my side, which is the House side. I talked to the Senate as well. Some of the senators were sort of like, we don't do this. But yes, we do. Because during virtual session, we were not allowed to have what we call companion bill. Usually, big bill like this, we would have one sponsor in the Senate and one sponsor in the House. And the joke in the House is that if there's a sponsorship in the Senate, the senator will get to have the governor's pen, because usually that bill is going to be the bill that passed. That's a joke. Nobody's laughing. So obviously, that is a very inciting joke of legislature. It's kind of like between the House and the Senate, we fight all the time. The House would say, we write better bill. And the Senate say, go ahead and write better bill. We're going to take credit for it. The other part that I wanted to share is that in the House, in my own caucus, even though we have the majority in my own caucus, it was very difficult to have the conversation, especially around including I-10 filer. Because we all have our own experience, right? We all came from neighborhoods, come from districts. It's sometimes it's really difficult for me to kind of figure things out. There's always all kind of reason, like certain members couldn't vote for something because they in the swing district. And I'm kind of like, but you won. So, and some members basically say, you know, my constituents do not like immigrants. They really like progressive stuff, but not immigrants, because the narratives, right, of immigrants are here to take our job, to make our life harder is real. And I share with you, I was in a very good position when those excuses came up. because I would share with them my own life story. I was a refugee. I get 18 months assistance from the federal. I get not much beside food stamps and TANF from the state. And honestly, if I have an economist in my family, I would ask them to do the calculations of how much I have contributed back to the state of Washington and this nation. And so I think those are the pieces of conversation you need to have. And when you trying to push some of these difficult conversations, please pay attention to who will be your champion, who have the stories that can really use as a narratives or counter narratives to put out there, because otherwise we stay in that circle. And that circle is a circle of racism. We all learned how to be a racist without knowing that. And so in order to unlearn it and then learn how to be an anti-racist, all of those are different steps that we need to take. And so to identify the champion who's gonna push for your legislation is critically important, and know their stories is critically important. And please don't pay so much attention to like so-and-so just get elected or so-and-so does not have a position in leadership. We need to like burn down that power structure. We need to lift people's voice up, because people's voice is powerful. Those who get to be in leadership positions of those power structure need to be taken down, and it starts with us.
Thank you. We're going to close at that. I got a text message from 3 different people that I'm already going over time. So we're going to quickly thank you all for being present with us, sharing your stories, sharing the amazing work you're doing, and hopefully all of you get to hang out with them for the rest of the day.